Hello, good afternoon. It is still Sunday. In fact, it is Sunday evening. But I have a bit of time and I thought I'd go back to reading. Last time I was reading, I was talking about chapter 35. I misread, it was 25. We are now at chapter 26 of BLISS Afterlife. I don't know why I keep doing that, because there's nothing there. It's a manuscript, it hasn't been published, and I'm reading it. So chapter 26 is entitled Natalie, who has just taken her own life, or not just, but in the previous chapters. Natalie had been completely immersed in her soul group, and when she was reunited with her soul, she left the group and was recovering in her favorite place, which for her was always a green meadow with a small hut as a shelter. She was sitting here now contemplating her last existence. Very soon she would study her life along with her group to discover the turns and twists leading to her too soon end. Once you are back, it all seemed so easy. The perspective is so much more comprehensive. It felt a little like hindsight. Natalie knew, like everyone does here, when you look back at a particular circumstance, the way a situation develops is often like a well-orchestrated drama. Her ending up in Susan's refuge was a long string of events which could have easily changed course. She could have taken a different coach, or actually got in touch with her old friend Nicola, or not had too much to drink and end up in the refuge. She could see now that the refuge had been a crossroad. It was to have been her salvation, but she had not given it a chance. Here, there is little room for regret, anger or despair, but Natalie realized that she would somehow need to find a stronger core in her next existence. She seemed to get stuck at the same lesson, always taking the easy way out, and the path to inner happiness always eluded her. She had always made her happiness dependent on other people. The only reason she kept giving in to Peter was because she was so desperate to be loved. She smiled. He never loved her, really. She was an easy lay, and now she could see that she had valued herself so little that she had thought that that was all she had been good for. Here she felt complete and content. A non-physical existence is so utterly different to being in the body. But the point was that a physical existence can be wonderful and rewarding. It just takes a little more life skill. When is she going to accomplish this? Because even as a soul, she was determined to succeed in this. She will absorb and work with the wisdom she had gained in her last short existence and consider a new incarnation at some point. At the moment, she enjoyed the beingness here. She suddenly thought of little Oliver. He had been such a ray of sunshine in the house. She suddenly had a very strong sense of his love, and she let herself go to connect with him. It was lovely to see the big table in the refuge, and she felt the love of the people there who had been prepared to give her this. They were having dinner and were remembering her. She had a sense of loss. It had been her decision to cut her life short, and this had made others sad. Too late, but still a lesson learned. Natalie relaxed and enjoyed participating quietly at her farewell dinner. Chapter 27. Rosie. Rosie lives in the house, in the refuge. Rosie was having a long soak in the bath after all the children had gone to bed. Chris and Holly had decided to drive home to Bournemouth, and Susan had also just left. During dinner, Rosie had remarked jokingly that Natalie had had a lucky escape. Rosie's life seemed a constant struggle, and with her 5 children from 2 different fathers, she certainly had never had an easy time. Somehow, she had always ended up with all the responsibility, and the father of Oliver and Helen was the most violent relationship she'd ever had. She was enjoying her bath and looked back at the lovely evening they had spent. Despite the sad death of Natalie, she finally felt a sense of safety and contentment. She was thinking of her children. Helen was now 5, and little Oliver had been a real accident. He was 3. Rosie had intended to leave Pete ages ago when he hit her after she had postnatal depression with Helen. Somehow she had stayed. Mark and Philip and Susie were older, and when Rosie ever stopped to think, she could never really figure out how she ended up with 5 children and 2 violent relationships. Things had always seemed to happen to her. Things always seemed to happen to her. She never felt in charge of her destiny. Although looking back, it had always really been her who made sure that there was enough food to eat, clean clothes to wear for the children, and a roof over their heads. If she had taken control of her life a little earlier, she could have avoided a lot of headache. Anyhow, she did realize at this dinner, around the lovely big table with all the children chattering and laughing, that her life was not so bad now. She had plans. For once, she was planning what life was going to be like, without fear of making a mistake. All her children had found a place in the local school and a nursery for Oliver. She had taken a job on in the mornings at the local sandwich shop. It was a very early start, but Isabella was helping to get Oliver to nursery school, and little Helen was being accompanied to school by Mark and Geraldine, the 2 older children of Rosie and Isabella. Alice had started college and was helping out, looking after the smaller ones. She and Isabella had struck up a firm relationship. Her story was not so very different to Rosie's, and they had decided to join forces. Isabella was a qualified nurse, and together they had plans to rent a place and help each other financially and with childcare. Susan and her friend Evelyn, the therapist, had often discussed ways of helping oneself and, more importantly, each other. Sophie had turned up very late for the dinner with Marcus, her 13-year-old son. She had found a job and a place to live, and her happiness was an inspiration to all of them. Life was so much easier when there was a little help from friends, but most importantly, the resolve in oneself to get on and create a more positive outlook made a hell of a difference. Rosie pondered that really life was not so bad, and she wished that Natalie had still been here to listen to her verdict. Chapter 28. Chris and Holly. When Holly and Chris got home, they decided there was still time for a nightcap. Holly got them both a drink, a cold glass of white. Chris was generally more of an ale man, but they finished off the opened bottle in the fridge. Holly put some comfy clothes on, and they settled in their respective seats. Both felt weary and a little drained. It had been an emotional time recently. They smiled at each other. Both were pleased to be in each other's company. There was an easy companionship. They had always been happy in each other's company. Of course, they had their differences, and they had certainly had their battles. But after over 25 years together, they had decided a long time ago that life was so much easier when they looked at each other's positive sides rather than pick on the negative. Their lives often seemed surrounded by bad relationships. Chris's help in the refuge and Holly's therapy work almost invariably involved couples at each other's throat. Maybe they simply suited each other, but they had also always been quite determined to face life together. Chris had... So this was paused, and I don't know when it was paused, so I best finish it here and pick up where I left off. Bye-bye. Happy Sunday evening.